Sony has just launched its first mid-cycle console, the PS4 Pro, which means they're already starting to look ahead to what they're going to be releasing in the future. A lot of people are saying that the PS4 Pro is going to mark the end of the life cycle of consoles as we know it, but I do think that Sony's probably going to be releasing a PlayStation 5 at some point, whether that's at E3 next year or sometime a lot later, like as late as 2020. With that said, in this video, I'm going to be going over everything that we know about the PlayStation 5 and what Sony might be planning. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So the PS4 Pro is offering a tantalizing hint of what 4K gaming could be like, but the stark fact remains it doesn't have the power to do 4K properly. Its checkerboard technique of taking single pixels and using each to render 4 pixels in 4K resolution is clever, but now 4K TV sales are gaining traction, so it's reasonable to expect console technology to advance at a level at which it can display 4K output natively. A lot of developers like Rebellion, for instance, are wanting new hardware to be able to support 4K TVs and possibly even 8K TVs at a push, so native 4K support will be a basic requirement of the PlayStation 5. If Sony cracks that particular problem sooner than expected, it could mean that the PlayStation 5 could be arriving a lot sooner than people think. Now, Sony recently became the first console manufacturer to embrace virtual reality thanks to PlayStation VR, but if you examine it a little bit more closely and observe how it operates on the PS4 Pro, it actually does hint about how a PS5 might take VR to a new level. Currently, PlayStation VR operates at a lower resolution than the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive, but as it stands, it actually pushes the base PlayStation 4 beyond its limits. Running a PlayStation VR on a PS4 Pro brings improved frame rates, which are really handy in terms of the overall VR experience, but even the PS4 Pro can't overcome the resolution constraint set by the PlayStation VR headset. It's a really good bet that, presuming the PlayStation VR is successful, that Sony will want to return to the market with a second, markedly higher tech version, and that would provide an obvious selling point for the PlayStation 5. Also, if a PlayStation VR 2 headset could be sold without an external black box, it should be markedly cheaper, further accelerating VR's march into the mainstream. Now, something else that's going to be really important about the PlayStation 5 is its form factor. It's been suggested that future consoles could take radically different forms to current ones thanks to advances in cloud computing bringing about the ability to stream games, but I really don't think that Sony will be taking a more Nintendo-like approach and put the PS5 in a tiny box. One big reason for that is that with the PS4, Sony's only just committed to using what are basically the innards of a PC. The first 3 PlayStation variants used proprietary components, which really weren't at the same level. Given that 4K games by definition contain much more data than 1080p ones, that issue is going to become exacerbated if a native 4K PS5 arrives. Any PS4 owner would put support for external USB hard disks at the top of their wish list, but given that Sony declined to let the PS4 Pro support them, I'm not too hopeful for now. Now, of course, if games were just streamed to the PS5, that problem would disappear entirely, and Sony does already have the game streaming service PlayStation Now. The biggest issue with this though is broadband speeds. Even 4K TV requires a minimum of 25 megabits per second broadband in order to provide satisfactory streaming, and it's very doubtful whether 4K game streaming with extra information on top of the visual side would even work reliably at such speeds. There would be nothing to stop Sony from launching a small form factor cloud-based version of the console for those with mega fast broadband, but for everyone else, I just don't think that's particularly realistic. For the PlayStation 5 to sell anything like its predecessors, there would have to be a conventional version with similar innards to the PlayStation 4. Now, with all this talk about streaming 4K games, it is going to be interesting to see if the PS5 still supports optical discs or not. My guess is that the PlayStation 5 won't be the first system to risk venturing down that road, although who knows, if Microsoft decides to go that direction with future Xboxes, Sony might follow along. Most gamers do like the possibility of buying games on physical discs, partly because they can then resell them, which is something that Sony hates, but also partly just due to hard disk space issues. Again, I really don't think it's that likely that Sony's going to be removing optical disc support from the PlayStation 5 though, so this is probably not something that we need to worry about for now. Now, the last interesting thing about the PlayStation 5 is when it's actually going to be releasing. Given that Sony's previous consoles have all arrived in 6-year intervals, it's very easy to project that it will launch the PlayStation 5 in 2019. The sort of technology available then should easily allow full native 4K games without saddling the PS5 with a massive price tag, and by 2019, 4K TVs will be the norm rather than the exception in the average households. With that said though, the PS4 Pro just released, so Sony might want to extend the PS4 life cycle just a little bit longer. Maybe 2020 will be the year in which Sony unleashes the PS5 on the world as the first native 4K console with wireless VR, as long as Microsoft doesn't get there first. But with that said, let me know what you want to see in the PlayStation 5 in the comment section down below. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and you're excited about what Sony is planning, and with that said, I will see you next time.